Joel, thank you so much for having me to your beautiful studio. I am so interested in your work and the way it comes together. Tell me a little bit about, no, not a little bit, tell me all about your process, because it is completely unique. And you called it collage, you told me, for lack of a better term. So it's not a collage in a typical sense. Can you explain how you go about doing these pieces?
Sure. I was very good when I was a kid at putting together complex jigsaw puzzles. And I think that I bring that up because in studying architecture and design, I think I have a way of composing things, and I think differently than a painter thinks as far as envisioning an object or an image. And the collage may not be the best terminology because it's a French term, and I kind of think it insinuates overlapping. Well, my works are put together like a jigsaw puzzle. And I'm basically creating my own puzzles. And I think that they become more like a small building project than they do as a painting. And I remember finishing the first few of them, regardless of whether they were good or bad. When I cut the last piece, they were done. And the emotional gratification of that feeling is just immeasurable.
So when you start, or before you start one of these artistic puzzles, do you start with first the idea and then comes a photograph, or is
Yes.
it an image you conjure in your head, or how does that work?
No, most of the landscapes are, I carry a camera with me everywhere I go, and I used to love doing on-site, drawings, but it's really not necessary. A photograph captures it better. And then I'll sometimes with digital you can do so much. Once you have the image, if it's just a small part of that image that becomes, sometimes that hard image, looking at it on my computer, I can be more objective about it. Whereas if I'm standing there in the landscape, I'm not seeing that smaller picture within the big picture. And once you've fixed it, you can go back to that. And it's the same with still lifes. When I set up my still lifes, I'll set them up in a window where I've got where I want lighting. And so I'll take numerous photographs. When I'm doing a portrait, I'll take a couple dozen photographs of that person. Most of the people that I've done portraits of, I know. I normally don't discuss with them the image that I choose. And I'm somewhat unapologetic. I mean, I've had a few people that I think might have been insulted that I didn't glamorize, but again, because of the process, it's more like shapes than it is a nose or an ear. You look at an ear and there's several curves and contours that make that shape, and so it's just capturing that.
You make it sound easy, but what I can't wrap my brain around is when you're painting, to get sort of those shadows, the lights and darks, you can mix those colors, whereas with your fabric collage, you have to find fabric that exists to sort of create that dimension. And I don't even know how you start. Where do you begin making those shapes with the different fabrics?
Typically, let's say like with a landscape, I will get the image that I want. I will do my cartoon. It'll be a full-scale drawing. It's just a pencil sketch. And then I want to establish my strong lights and my strongest lights and my strongest darks. And usually never black, although black, as a painter, you're taught to never use black. You use a combination of blues and browns and beautiful grays. They're created, not black and white to create gray, blue and brown. But when I started in this, there's something deep and dark and mysterious about black leather. And so some of my early ones, I started with that. Now I may use black, but then I'm working on top of that. As you can see behind me, I have tons of paints and markers that I use because I'm at the mercy of contemporary fabric designers, in the sense that for several years during the 90s, greens weren't really green, they were kind of blue-green. And so, and at the time, I would spend a lot of time seeking out just that right fabric. Now, if it's not the right color, I will either pre-paint it on a piece of very interesting textured fabric, and I'll use if I'm doing an orange, there may be 3 or 4 different textures within that orange, and then I'll do my color variations independent and have 3 or 4 shades of orange in front of me. So and then when I'm drawing, I'll draw the shape of the orange into the still life and just kind of fix the subject matter. And then as I get to that, all the shadowing and stuff is done in process. I don't do an overly detailed drawing. This portrait of Don probably has, I don't know, 200 or 300 individual pieces of fabric. I could not foresee those and pre-cut them and then take 300 pieces to my seamstress and say, now you need to stitch these together. That's not the way it's done. In the end, I'm showing them just as you would show a canvas painting. Okay. So they're stretched on canvas bars. So because of that, I am needing to have that canvas in its taut, stretched condition when I start my gluing. And so, so this you can see is stretched taut on this board. Then I've got my drawing. That was my drawing. And so what I do now is I go through tons of cheap Scotch tape. And when I cut that pattern, when I cut that piece of pattern out, I find the piece of fabric, and now I'm much more conscious. A lot of fabrics have diagonals, have a pattern to them. That can really work well in compositions, where you're playing with those diagonals so that within a round shape you get these other things happening.
Right.
And then coupled with the different colors, it's very interesting. I tape it completely down. So that it is, and I undercut it just fractionally because I use a water-based fabric glue. And as soon as you apply that water to the back of that fabric, it wants to expand. And I had some initial problems with some of my early ones where I literally got out of drawing. Where if you're working with perspective and you've got a tabletop or whatever, and you're working one way to the other and you're not conscious that you're blowing out your pattern, suddenly it can throw your perspective off.
Sure.
And so, I've learned a lot over the years that I've done these, and so now I just fractionally undercut it. I'd rather stretch it a little bit into place than have to recut it. That's very difficult and laborsome, and you're not exacting, but if you can undercut it a little bit and then push it into place. And that also, I think, helps maintain the stretch. Because once the gluing process is done, I take them off, they're pretty stiff. But then my seamstress takes them, and she's running them through a commercial straight stitch sewing machine. So by the time she gets done with them, they're supple again. But there's very little stretching that needs to be done at that point, because they're stretched when I glue the pieces on. They're still stretched when she does the stitching. I'm looking at this piece right behind us. The stitching, for the large part, disappears. A lot of people, when I'm exhibiting them, walk right by them, not realizing what they are. I'm always intrigued because experienced painters, are usually the ones that are first, because when I set up a show and I first take them out, the painters can tell from a distance that there's something else going on. And then when they get up on them, they're kind of intrigued with the same questions you're asking me.
Sure. Tell me about the fabrics that you use. Is there a type of fabric that is harder to work with, but you use it anyway because you love it? How do you make those choices?
I have done some non-representational pieces, sort of some abstractions, and really of all of the work I do, that type of work lends itself beautifully if you want to use exclusively leathers and suedes. And they would be top of my list. But when you get into still lifes and landscapes, they don't afford the textural qualities that you get in upholstery grade fabrics. And when I'm shopping for fabrics, I'm looking as much at the back of the fabrics. Sometimes they're more abstracted and the colors are more muted. And sometimes they're very gray, and I never have enough grays. So upholstery grade fabrics I don't use a lot of silks and satins, which initially I did doing red apples, or you can find those colors best in silks and satins, but they don't cut well, they don't glue well. The glue usually comes through. So now I will select a couple different interesting textures, paint those the variations of color that I need to do whatever I'm working on.
So like many artists, your path has been winding, but I have to ask, is this your dream job?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, my daughters and my grandkids have never thought I had a job, which is it can be a bad thing, because they think I'm lazy, and I'm not lazy at all. But it's been a sacrifice of income. I mean, my wife has worked most of her life so that we could still live a decent lifestyle. And Indiana and Ossian, I mean, as far as, I don't think I could have this home and property many other places. So, and being a born and bred Hoosier, headquartering myself here is a good thing.
Well, Joel, thank you for having me and explaining your process. Thank you for giving your art to the world, because it is really something.
Oh, thank you.
And thanks for sitting down with me.
You're welcome.
For more information, visit freemianart.com.
Arts in Focus on PBS Fort Wayne is funded in part by